Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo. If you thought by some miraculous stroke of faith the last days of 2020 would end the coronavirus pandemic, well then, reality check. We're nearing the end of the first month of 2021 and coronavirus is still here with us. Although there are promises of better times ahead with the advent of several vaccines, the truth of the matter is we still need to do more preventive measures if we're keen on turning down the curve of infections in Nigeria. What should individuals, families as well as government do at this point in time? Again, as the number of COVID-19 related deaths increase, affected families are left to mourn and most times they wallow in grief and regret. I will be speaking with an expert on how to cope with loss and isolation. Joyce Umetu is here with me. She's standing in for Elizabeth Omori. Joyce, welcome to Insight. What do you have for us on this episode of the program?
Well, I intend to engage my guest, who is a youth leader on Nigeria's anti-corruption crusade, and how the youth factor in the fight. So much is being done by the current administration in the fight against corruption. Are the youth impressed, and are they playing their part to ensure they win the war?
Very well, let's begin. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has over the last few months raised alarm over what it termed negligence and public disregard for COVID-19 prevention guidelines as the second wave of infections claim lives. It has also stoked palpable fear across the country. But whether this is enough to make us practice safer preventive non-pharmaceutical measures as prescribed by experts is what I will be talking about with Dr. Iyame Ogbonnaya, a family health physician. He joins me now in the studio to discuss these and other public health safety issues. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you very much, Nnamdi. My pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, Abuja.
Doc, case counts are increasing across the country. That worries a lot of people. Why is it difficult for communities to practice caution over traditions that predate COVID-19 in spite of increasing losses and the palpable fear around across the country? I understand it's an amalgam of different issues, but then how can we even rationalize the disregard for caution?
To be quite frank with you, I am highly at a loss to put reasons to why the average Nigerian finds it very difficult to comply with basic protocols as far as his own safety is concerned. Now, we're talking about his own safety. We're not talking about the government's own safety. We understand how recently we are all inundated with the news of how the rates have kept skyrocketing over the days, and it makes sense that knowing how fatal COVID-19 could be. I mean, it presupposes the fact that we do not need to be preached so much. We do not need to hear so much gospel about preventive practices before we put that into practice. Because by and large, as we put this into practice, it's actually our health we are looking at. It's actually our long life we're actually looking at. So it beats me to understand why. Right from time when the first sensitization was made on air, and even with the presidential task force and all whatnot, and even all the FCD task force, all the efforts they put in going from place to place, even the lockdown that has been in place, even the fact that a lot of people have access to internet, see the glory sites from across the globe, how many people die and how mortuaries are filled up and so on and so forth. It still beats me to understand why Nigerians find it difficult to, as much as possible, to comply with these basic protocols. Not that they are difficult, like I keep saying. Even the 5-year-old child that is by the corner, if you ask him, he can always rattle out what those preventive practices are. So I don't understand why it's difficult and why it's tough for many people to actually abide by this simple protocol, which could be life-saving in the end.
We see pictures from, across the world, pictures from the US, from the UK, and other parts of the world. And we're beginning to get variants of the virus from different parts of the world. Isn't it time for us to consider a travel ban from some countries, like the UK, for instance?
Yeah, I think at the time, such ideas were actually mooted, tinkered with nationally. But I think, well, with all due respect to, the powers that be, just like we actually were forced, kind of sounding the alarm initially that the border airports and borders should be closed the first time before COVID-19 entered into the country. Now that same alarm has started ringing, and then that same deaf ears are also being turned. If bigger countries, European countries, more knowledgeable countries, more technologically advanced countries, all due respect to us, are also placing this travel ban on UK. The other day you heard about all European nations place travel ban on UK. It cannot get worse than that. So I wonder why we find it difficult, even with all our challenges. As much as possible, making diagnosis, treating, containing the widespread nature of this pandemic. I find it hard to understand why we are finding difficult to pull this button of a travel ban.
Dr. Bunaya, we ended the last year, that is 2020, on a very gloomy note. We entered into the new year quite optimistic of what the new year would bring, and that better days were ahead. And of course, I'm talking about with the arrival of vaccines. But is it likely that the arrival of vaccines has helped to increase public disregard for safety? Saying that Nigeria is still on the waiting list to receive the promised doses, should the promise of vaccine incentivize disregard, or are we expected to keep our shield up? Regardless.
Yeah, I think ideally, the arrival of vaccines should, like you rightly said, should actually increase the awareness and the hunger for us to actually receive these vaccines. But unfortunately, I think with the advent of social media and the misinformation therein, you notice a lot of people are giving us wrong information about what is not possible about the vaccines. People are rather exaggerating more about the side effects, the allergic effects, which is not unusual. People will tell you, yes, even if there are side effects. Now, if you should look at it from the pros, the benefits, the pros and the cons. If you look at what is saving, the life is going to save. Talk about a patient that has this COVID-19 that might actually be facing a certain death. Now, you have this option of getting the vaccine, and then this vaccine will save your life, but maybe it could give you one or two side effects, which may
fever,
exactly. So I don't know
that the vaccine is actually working.
Exactly. So I wouldn't understand why people would rather want to focus more on the adverse effects and then put all kinds of alarmist theories, conspiracy theories, as the case may be, on social media, which of course will always reduce their incentiveness. People will always attach to the advent of this vaccine.
Dr. Bunaya, there's also the issue of penalties, penalizing those who break public safety protocol for COVID-19. Apparently, I wouldn't say it doesn't seem to be working as much, but it's supposed to act as a deterrent to offenders. Do you have an opinion on how punishment can balance with encouragement in order for people to become perhaps more cautious?
Definitely. There is always a room for what the so-called carrot and stick approach. Where the stick approach is the issue of penalties. It could take the form of monetary fines. It could also take the form of community service and so on and so forth. Now, carrots, whereby people who consistently, maybe organizations that consistently maintain this wear your mask approach and all forms of social distancing, also receive some form of tax rebates and holidays from the government. Okay. I think by the time all these things are put into place, not necessarily soldiers going to the street to flog. I'm talking about, basic, having mobile courts where people are made to face, made to understand their offenses. made to understand the gravity of the mistake they made, not just to themselves, but also to the general population they interact with. So I think if government should establish courts like this, where those cases are established beyond all reasonable doubt, people understand the offenses and get to be schooled further on the whatever it is offense they committed. It will help reduce the cases of laxity on the part of the populace.
Doc, we've been talking about accepting personal and collective responsibility for public health safety. What are the likely consequences of continued disregard of personal safety tips, one? And secondly, rules that are put in place by the authorities. Is a third wave of infection possible? Wouldn't that be more difficult to tackle, seeing that we're back to talking about availability of space at isolation and treatment centers? These days, I've even heard about scarcity of ventilators. Indeed, continued rise in case count isn't what we need at this point in time.
That is not what we need. You are even talking about scarcity of ventilators. Oxygen, there's also scarcity of oxygen. We in the field, we actually can attest to this. We have ventilators, of course, being the mainstay of management for most of these patients. Most of the patients, the ones that are actually, in ICU critical cases. Now, of course, we are looking at the situation about some of the ventilators that came in during that critical first wave. Many of them are in a state of disrepair. They are not working. Some are bought second class. Some are born, all states of malfunctioning. So let's not even go there. So we are even looking at simple things like oxygen, that you can also use to maintain them while they tide you over that period of sickness. One actually gets alarmed that oxygen, there's an acute shortage of oxygen in the country. This has actually engineered the government, the relevant authorities, to commission about 6 plants, 5 plants in the 6 geopolitical zones. And we hope that in the coming days, this will reflect in the presence of oxygen. At least the basic oxygen that we need to cater for these patients while we're watching them tidy over the sickness.
Just before I let you go, Dr. Gunaya, please speak to the importance of face shields and coverings as non-pharmaceutical measures against the spread of COVID-19. What is even more popular, what I see is people wearing their face masks below the chin rather than cover their nose and mouth with it.
Yeah, sure. It's very funny because I ask myself, what was the point wearing the face mask in the first place? If what we are aiming for is protection of the mucous membranes around the eyes, around the nostrils, around the mouth, where these viruses easily gain access to. Now, if you cannot protect them and you wear your so-called chin shield, as some chin mask, as some people now call it, or some people even wear it behind. So what's the point wearing it? With all the discomfort it gives you. So I think if you want to wear a face mask, wear it properly. If you have to, probably you are worried about the discomfort it gives you. Okay, if you must have to remove the face mask, at least know that at least you are within a safe distance from where droplets can easily access you, from coughing, from all kinds of things, from, discussing with people. So at that stage, you can safely do your chin mask, as the case may be. That also brings me quickly to face shield. I get a little worried when I see people wear only face shield. Well, if you can understand the dynamics of the molecules, the viral molecules, how they move, I think that face shields may not be enough to protect you. It's appropriate if you must wear a face shield, you still have to wear a face mask underneath. Why? Because these viruses, the particles actually move zigzag, center, and so on and so forth. So they are able to, the space that is in between your face and that shield, they can still manage to penetrate and still aim towards that mucous membrane where it wants to use to penetrate finally into the person. So it's only the face mask that, when it is worn properly, whichever type it is, the surgical mask for those that can afford, the face mask, to some extent, or the N95 mask. It's only when it is those ones are worn appropriately that it has been shown to give you at least more than 95 protection from the viral penetration into those affected surfaces.
Very quickly, Dr. Gunaya, there's also the issue of personal hygiene. Like washing of hands, use of sanitizers and all of that. Can you quickly speak to that?
Yes, yeah, like it has always been widely emphasized, we must always learn, we must always sanitize. If you cannot sanitize, maybe due to cost issues, please always have a soap with you, so that you can, anywhere, the slightest place you see running water, you go wash your hands as often as possible. Then if you know you can afford your sanitizer, use it as often as you can. Each time there is always a contact with any surface, with any personality or whoever, wherever you are not comfortable with the hygienic nature of the place. I mean, it's always wise that we should use a hand sanitizer. Let's also make this point clear that now, as we are doing this, everything that has a beginning has an end. There is we are still looking forward to a world where there will be COVID-free. We're looking at a COVID-free world in the time to come. Now, if we build up these hygiene practices now, which COVID has forced on us to learn, it's going to even ensure a healthier world, even in the post-COVID era. So I think we should, as much as possible, imbibe this culture. It's very life-saving.
Finally, on the final note, just before I let you go, it's quite possible for us to beat this second wave of infections if we do things right.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Dr. Iyemi Ogbonna, family health physician, thank you so much for joining me on Insight. It's been quite a pleasure speaking with you on this matter.
My pleasure, as always, Namdi. Thank you, Nigeria.
Moving ahead now, I am sure as individuals we've had to deal with some grave or deep personal issues one time or the other. In recent times, many of us have had to balance daily living with isolation. I've seen families experience loss of a loved one, maybe or maybe not from COVID-19. How do we cope with loss and isolation in times like this? Dr. Ephraim Oluwanuga is Chief Consultant Psychiatrist, National Hospital Abuja, and a Senior Lecturer in Psychiatry, University of Abuja. Welcome to Inside, Doc.
Thank you.
Dr. Oluwanuga, there are a few feelings closely associated with loss and isolation. There is the issue of fear, there is loneliness and depression. Are these all common feelings consequent upon a person experiencing loss? For instance, or are they clinical symptoms of other mental health issues or psychosocial illnesses?
No, for up to 6 months, we allow for a person to have any of those feelings that you've described, because grief and loss is something that has a very high impact on the mind. So during that period, the person could have symptoms of depression, feeling unhappy, crying a lot, not sleeping well, not interested in food or other normal activities. Those are normal responses to grief.
Dr. Oluwanuga, how best can an individual take care of one's mental health during a pandemic, especially after experiencing the passing of a loved one?
When one experiences the passing of a loved one, it's important to remember that death is inevitable. At some point, it will happen. Even if it didn't happen due to COVID, we can take it from a philosophical point of view and say that the person would have lost the person to something else anyway, even if it has not been COVID. So the thing would be to not focus. Don't focus on the fact that it is COVID. Focus on the fact that this person is gone. Focus on the good memories of the person. Focus on the life the person lived, and focus on the fact that that person will not want you to grieve and harm yourself in a state of grief. Therefore, we have to try our best to not allow the thought that it is COVID make us turn it into an abnormal grief situation. this is the time to have that serenity prayer attitude that says, help me, give me the grace to cope with things I cannot change. We cannot change death. We cannot change the outcome of death. But we can seek the strength of mind to be able to cope better.
But of course, I don't know, but I expect that the strategy would differ for someone in isolation. I was in self-isolation for a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, for 2 weeks sometime last year. It was horrible, I can tell you. It was frightening. It was one of the lowest points for me last year in 2020. I mean, fortunately, my test result came out much later and it showed I was negative to COVID-19. But I can tell you I experienced symptoms not even related to COVID-19. I was frightened. I was always shaking. I mean, until the test result gave me some form of reassurance. How does an individual manage such feelings in isolation?
Person is in isolation and the person is bereaved, it's doubly difficult because just as you correctly said, isolation can be stressful and bereavement is stressful. So if a person is bereaved and is in isolation, the way to try to mitigate it might be to try to stay in touch virtually as much as possible. That is, even though one is in isolation, make phone calls, talk to people, see whether you can talk to people from across the door to the room where you are. It's difficult, but it's possible. Now, for a person who is not bereaved, who is in isolation because they have COVID, it's a time to do your best to look for activities that will make the time pass. Because you have to occupy your mind. If you don't deliberately occupy your mind with things of your choice, the mind will occupy itself with things that may be unpleasant. So it would be a good idea, for example, to be in isolation and try and listen to music, try and watch television, things to distract your mind. So you could do things to focus your mind. You could read, you could meditate, but make sure that you are in control as much as possible of what your mind is doing.
Dr. Oluwanuga, you just raised the issue of control. Yeah, I have heard experts like yourself, telling people about focusing on what is within the individual's control. There's diet. They also talk about modulating one's sleep pattern and engaging in physical exercises. What happens if other factors outside of that individual's control largely determine their state of mind? There is, for example, now the news of a terrible event concerning an individual. I mean, you're controlling the things you can control, and suddenly there on the TV you get or someone calls you on the phone and gives you an horrible news.
Well, the attitude would be that even this bad news that one has had, one cannot. It's another variable. It's another event again that one cannot control. So, just as one cannot necessarily even say they can control the outcome of the disease and so on and so forth. So, you see, the thing to do would be to try and get support. Somebody, you hear some news, you can discuss it with other people. Get comfort from them. Try and get more information to allay your own anxiety, for example. But you cannot afford to be worried excessively about what you can't control. If one is in isolation and one is hearing bad news, one can only just say, wow, what a difficult time, and all of these things are happening together. All right, this is a dark period, but the darkest part of the night always comes before the dawn. So I'm going to overcome
Dr. Oluwanuga, what's the best support structure for someone who has just experienced a loss?
The best support structure for someone who has just experienced a loss is for other people to be with the person, to share in the grief. That's why when a family member dies, family members come together. It's very soothing when people can work together as a family, comfort one another. It's harder when someone is bereaved and there's nobody around who even knew the person that one lost. I'm talking of, let's say a person was abroad and just heard that someone died back home, and all the people around, they don't know this person that died. They can only understand, okay, this person lost maybe his dad, but they don't know the person. They can't share memories and so on. So the best support structure will be to be in touch with whom you can share memories, talk about that person, reminisce, and so on. But if that is unavailable, then one can actually seek professional grief counseling. Because if you are talking to a professional, even if the professional doesn't know the bereaved person, the professional can talk to you, address your own issues, address your own concerns, and help you to feel better.
I'm sorry, but I know all of this talk about death sounds morbid to a lot of folks. I mean, but tell me something, Dr. Oluwanuga. Is the management of loss the same for all cases, or they could vary with the situation or circumstances leading to the loss? For instance, is the loss of a child, maybe a minor now, the same as the loss of a parent? Do we all pass through the same stages of grief? And what varies essentially for the bereaved?
Okay, so there are certain things that are common to loss. Whether it's a child, whether it's a parent, but there are also certain things that are very different. Because, for example, if one loses a parent, one would know that it's more or less like the expected order. And so the one who kind of have had it in mind, imagine somebody losing a parent who is 90 years old. Of course, the person will be sad. You wish he wasn't 96, you wish he would have lived to over 100, but you have a lot of memories of that person's legacy. That person has left a legacy, a list of achievements of that person's life. That's different from the loss of a young person. For example, a person for whom one had aspirations and so on, a rising. So that can be difficult to take. But you see, the underlying principle is still the same. We still need to come to that point where one can say that, look, no matter the amount of time we had with this individual, whether it was short or whether it was long, that was the program time. And that was the best of the time that we could have had. And so that thought eventually would comfort the person. But it's usually harder. It's usually harder when one loses a child. I have to tell you that.
Yeah, it's quite hard. I mean, I can attest to that. I have suffered personal loss, and I mean, it can be really painful and frustrating, and I don't know, but time they said heals all. Maybe not as quickly as the individual would want. Dr. Oluwanuga, there are a few studies out there that, and since we're talking about comfort and grief, there are a few studies out there that say that an individual can die from grief. How can that happen? And is that the same thing as saying that an individual can die of a broken heart?
Yes, an individual can die from grief because the grieving process is hard on the body physically. And so, supposing a person was grieving, not eating, not drinking, getting dehydrated, probably if the person had a pre-morbid condition before, for example, supposing the person had a health condition, a pre-existing health condition, diabetes, hypertension, kidney disease, and then because of the fact that the person is grieving, the person is not paying attention to their health, or simply put, some just lose the will to live. They just lose the will to live, and sadly, some people die grieving. But it's not something that is desired, and it's something that could be prevented if people around paid more attention to that person's grief. Because usually for someone to die from grief, most of the time it will be what we call abnormal grief. And when people around notice that, they should come in and, help the person. If they can't, that is one of the cases where they definitely should try to get professional help.
Dr. Oluwanuga, please assure me once more that in spite of all the pain, the emotional turmoil, and the fear that often accompanies loss and isolation, that we can still overcome, grief with proper care.
Yes, we can overcome grief. We can overcome grief with determination. We can overcome grief with support of other loved ones around us. We can overcome grief by taking on that philosophy that life is not infinite. There has to come a day when even we who are grieving, one day we shall go. And for those who believe in the life after this life, again, that is another point of consolation, believing that that person has gone on to a better place, believing that we too will go on to the better place and be rejoined with that person in future. All those are comforting. And as I said, if it is required, if it is desired, professional help also can assist a person to overcome it.
Dr. Ephraim Oluwanuga, Chief Consultant Psychiatrist, National Hospital, Abuja. It's been a pleasure speaking with you on Insight. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
And up next is the media review segment.
Corruption is a global challenge as it hinders development. Its effect cuts across all spheres of life. It has been a major factor obstructing sustainable development in developing countries. Now, today on the Media Review segment, we will x-ray the role of youth in curbing corruption. And my guest, President Youth in Africa Anti-Corruption Network, Ova Otarigo, will dwell on the issue. Glad to have you join us on Insight.
Thank you for having me today.
Now, corruption is a global factor. What is your assessment?
I think corruption globally is a problem, but the effect is mostly found in the developing country. In Nigeria, for example, because of the high rate of young people in the country, any act of corruption becomes overblown. Because one of the areas we've looked at in identifying corruption in Nigeria is how it affects young people having access to economic opportunities.
Absolutely.
So when this effect is shown in this area, young people tend to feel it more. And one thing that is very prominent again is corruption affects the level with which people grow. In our education, for example, I think in 2018, we had a review of corruption in Nigeria, and it captured that educational sector is the second most corrupt area in Nigeria.
Absolutely.
And affects more young people because majority of the young people go through educational system and all that. So
Yeah, like you rightly said, we can't talk about corruption most times without talking about the youth. Now, in what ways are the youth contributing to this menace?
one of the ways young people contribute to this menace is that young people patronize corruption, for real. Although analysis has shown that young people really don't create the conditions for corruption anyway, but they patronize corruption more. For example, I was talking about the educational system.
Right.
Before you gain access to university, some persons create certain obstacles for young people to gain admission. And because they need to gain admission, they patronize these people and they pay money to sometimes lecturers, VCs, whatever. By doing that, you are patronizing corruption.
Absolutely.
But can we young people really stand up and stop this trend? The answer is yes. And one of the easiest ways to fight corruption as young people is to exercise our civic responsibility. Part of our civic responsibility is to report wrongdoing, which means that if you are on a crossroad and you are being asked to pay in for something that you know it is wrong, you report to the authorities. I mean, the general response for people will say that most time when you report, the authorities don't act. Exactly. But the truth is this: exercise your civic responsibility and report wrongdoing. I think that's one of the ways young people can actually fight corruption. Secondly is knowledge. If we have the knowledge that these areas of life is not right, it becomes easier for young people to stand up against it. For example, people think corruption is only in governance, but that's not true. Corruption flows even within our daily lives. I always make example of young people who sell at the fuel attendants in filling stations. You know, because they have a structure of skimming people of their money. They continuously do this. You pay for, you want to get a full tank, you have to pay 10,000. By the time you turn your head the other way, they swipe the meter. These are acts of corruption, which we all indulge in, but we don't know. We see the government officials as the only people who are corrupt. So these are the areas young people can actually bring it down.
Okay, let's talk about getting rich quick. You know, the whole getting rich quick syndrome.
Yes.
Now, most youths are attached to this. How do we erase their mindsets? Because this is an actual factor.
I mean, one of the ways to actually erase the mind of young people from that getting rich quick syndrome is to make hard work pay. So when a situation whereby millions of young people graduate, at the minimum of 1 million Nigerians graduate from school, technically, every year. And when they finish university, they join the other millions of people who are out of job. So the system should be fair enough to create opportunities for young people.
Right.
Why people have that, some of the reasons why young people tend to have the syndrome of get rich quick is because those who have treaded that path make it look attractive. Until we make education more attractive and hard work more attractive, people will keep looking the other way. There are times people spend longer years at work, they will be faithful to their duties, but they don't get appreciation from the offices where they work. You know, so over time, people get to have the impression that hard work doesn't pay, but it does pay. So we need to have a reorientation in our structure to appreciate people who do the right thing, appreciate those who are on a course of justice, course of honesty and integrity. It will encourage more people to do the right thing and discourage the get rich quick syndrome, which we have experienced in the past years.
So we'll make hard work look more attractive. Now, corruption obstructs development. Are there principles to be adopted, or rather, what principles would you suggest to reduce it to the barest?
I think the universal principle is ethics. Have the right values. When you have the right values, corruption will be unattractive. For example, if you have that value for integrity in your office, nobody comes to your office to review his file or something, and you ask the person to pay some money. You know, it's as petty as that. So people must have that integrity in them to be able to fight corruption.
Right.
You know. Secondly is knowledge. Like I mentioned before, when you have knowledge about the areas what leads to corrupt practices, it helps you to avoid it. Then finally, I would say this: our justice system has to be strong.
Right.
When people indulge in corrupt practices and they get away with it, it encourages other people to continue. There has to be a strong justice system. If there's one thing we must fix really quickly in our country to be sure that corruption is pushed behind, is to fix our justice system. We see in an advanced country where people indulge in corruption. It's not only a Nigerian problem.
Right.
But the difference is that people face the consequence of what they've created or indulged in, and they go to jail. But here, people do all kinds of things and they don't go to jail. So it gives the impression that if you have your money, whichever way you made your money, you can always survive. It mustn't be so. Corruption is felt in our security system, its architecture in the country today, because people who are meant to protect us may have done things they ought not to do. And there's no punishment for those people. You know, in our education, it's the same. In our health, it's the same. People die in hospital where contract has been awarded to contractors to renovate.
Absolutely.
And these are not done. We talk about the roads. I mean, it's in all facets of the economy.
Now, moving forward, how can the youths and indeed the family play in the efforts to rid the society of the graft?
A family. Family has a strong role to play, because the truth is, the society is a reflection of the family. What you can't control within the family manifests in society. I was driving in one of the streets and I saw some vigilante at the entrance of the street, you know.
Right.
And they just looked. It was around 7 p.m. It was dark. I turned on my light. He looked at my face. Oh, Oga, now you. The next thing he said is that anything for the boy. Now, this culture has played out within us, and it's manifest in a larger system, like what we've seen in the police structure.
Right.
But the truth is this: it's not the problem of police alone. It has cascaded. It's a product of the family translating to the society and moving onto the institution. So the family has a role to play. In those days, a child comes back home with a pencil. The mother says, "How did you get this?" But today, people don't ask questions. A child of 16 years comes back with iPhone 12, and the mother takes it for Instagram selfie and all that. They don't ask questions anymore.
Right. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Mr. Ovo Otarigo, President Youth in Africa Anti-Corruption Network. And that's it on the Media Review segment.
And just before we draw the curtain on this episode, it is important to cast our minds back to how life was relatively easier before coronavirus struck and displaced most of human activities. I, for one, have had to limit outdoor activities, and surprisingly too, some indoor activities where there are more than 40 persons in a tight enclosed space. One outdoor activity that is quite popular here in the country is the Calabar Carnival. For obvious reasons, the 2020 festival could not hold, but the organizers were quite creative with what they could organize. Gabe Honor is the chairman, Cross River State Carnival Calabar Commission. Welcome to Insights, Gabe.
Good morning, Nnamdi, and good to be on NTA again.
Good, great. Of course, like most other festivals associated with the end of the year and heralding the new year, last year's edition of the Calabar Carnival suffered a major setback. What do you think the state and indeed Nigeria in general lost in terms of value owing to that challenge?
Indeed, it was a tough one for us, but because the issue at hand was a global one, the pandemic was a global one, it had to do with health. Only the living can entertain. Only the living can smile and dance, which is what we offer. So we needed to go with the flow. And, being a proactive state, we decided to look at the numbers and go with the flow. His Excellency thought that we should not lose tomorrow for celebrating today.
Well, but I still understand that some level of ingenuity was applied nonetheless, even though you couldn't achieve the public display associated with the carnival, which of course is the hallmark of the festival. But tell me how the ingenuity played out and what you were able to achieve somewhat with the carnival last year.
Yes, truly, a couple of properties make up the Calabar Festival and Carnival. We have the Festival Village, we have the Arts and Crafts Center, we have the Miss Africa, we have the Bikers event and all of that. But what we did was that we decided to look at the socioeconomic aspect of Carnival and activated the festival market, the cultural village, the cultural village. We said no matter what, since markets are open and we needed to encourage people to enjoy the outdoor while maintaining the protocol. And we kept the village open for the 30 days event, and the Arts and Craft Village, which was an initiative and a paradigm introduced by the new Commissioner for Culture and Tourism, Honorable Eric Anderson. Then, of course, the Miss Africa event, we had gone very far in coordinating and sensitizing our African countries who had gone through all the processes. So what we did was that instead of losing it all along the line, we took the painful decision to have it in the stadium, in the bigger open, and restricted the visitor invites to less than 50 with 2 meter spacing. It was a painful decision, but the governor had to do it to ensure that lives were protected. And we ensured that the participating queens came seamlessly and left seamlessly, and we left it very quiet and ensured that the required things we needed to do, spacing people, instead of even 1 meter, we did 2 meters, to ensure that we marked the date. Recall that we have just been readmitted into the global carnival calendar called the Carnival in Spain. And if you don't mark your dates, you of having that date taken by other waiting brands. Yeah. And we were strong in the website, and we decided to ensure that we presented a showing to say that we are still here.
Gabe, beyond the rats matters, of the carnival, the music, and of course the invaluable tradition, carnivals the world over are an expression of the enormous potential of the creative industries. How innovative has the Calabar Carnival been in terms of what has played out, whether in presentation or packaging? And what innovations can you quickly point out has been truly unique?
Truly, you got it right when you described Carnival as a strong tourism product to change lives, to have a mass of people be in one place and interact. But above and beyond this dancing and the joy we see, there's so much behind the scenes. The preparations, the costuming, the makeup, the choreography, you can name them. The opportunities in the subsector are boundless, and it is life-changing. It is a low-hanging fruit. It is one of those frameworks United Nations World Tourism Organization had adopted, using culture to transform the people, using culture to bring the people together, using culture to create peace. This is what Carnival Calabar has achieved. And remember, this is one government program that started as a little vision, but has outgrown all its founders, outgrown all its creators. And today, we have also introduced the international segment, International Carnival, that has made Calabar, Nigeria, the signature of all eyes in Africa. And that culture is indeed a great platform for cultural diplomacy. What culture can achieve? A lot of time, roundtable discussions hardly can achieve them because people interact in a novelty circumstance. People interact one-on-one and discover that the cultures of different nations are just thin lines that separate us, and that we actually can aggregate together. Remember that we grew this subsector from a paltry 50,000 revelers, and the local spectators, about 1.3 million. The Nigerian spectators, now, apart from the television audience across the 54 nations of Africa. Not to talk of now with globalization through the internet, and Zoom came to our rescue because of the acceptance of the virtual space.
Gabe, I cannot agree more with you. I mean, culture is a strong force and tool for diplomacy. But let me take you off the subject of last year's event for a bit and ask you about the core mandate of the festival. I did a quick rundown of the theme of the various editions that you've had since inception. Each theme speaks to an issue, mostly environmental. What determines the choice of the theme for a year's celebration, and how do you then weave that theme around the activities to mark that year's edition?
Wonderful, Nnamdi. The theme actually is the guiding principle or the philosophy of any carnival yearly. The theme is chosen from among suggested areas of endeavors in the currency of that year. The executive producer of Carnival Calabar is usually the governor. We have been blessed with creative and forward-looking governors who are all carnival, who are all entertainment, who also like to connect, and create that avenue for togetherness. So remember that carnival is also theater on the move. So the elements, the elements that make for a theater experience are present. From scripting, from conceptualization, to drama itself, to acting, and to costume, all delivering a seamless message so that the eye and the senses can achieve them. This is what the themes are all about, but it focuses that it is not just a play, but it is a play, a serious play for a reason, a serious play for passion, a serious play for intellectual engagement. Today, we've received over 20 doctoral, students worldwide who have come to research on the carnival, not to talk of people who have written for their first and second degrees, and the sustainability aspect of carnival is that which has to do with what the locals have to gain this subsector. And when the young people are engaged, they work hard, and there is little room for troublemaking. And how much price can you pay for peace as a responsible and forward-looking government? This is the ultimate.
Gabe, just before I let you go, I know you're definitely not a fortune teller, so I will not ask you about this year's edition or whether or not it would hold. But then I would like for you to just make a projection and tell me this: what happens if you cannot hold this year's events, and in 2021, and you cannot have a public gathering yet? Again. What are you considering? Are you considering a digitized platform to host the carnival as we see play out in other parts of the world?
Well, firstly, 2 weeks ago, the governor directed his chief press secretary to reassure Crossiverians and Nigerians and the whole world that Carnival Calabar 2021 will be fireworks. We are hopeful people and we are forward-looking people. Most of last year, most of the carnivals that were already off the ground in planning held virtually. And most of our spectators to Miss Africa last year attended Miss Africa virtually. So this year, we are going to commence early preparations and have it as a plan A. A plan A in case the pandemic that is not known to man, that is beyond man at this point, persists. But our plan B, which is actually our plan A1, would have been that we'll hit the streets running again so that we'll do what we are best known for.
It will be quite interesting to see how a virtual carnival will play out in Calabar. I, for one, would like to see how that happens. Gabe Honor, Chairman, Cross River State Carnival Calabar Commission, thank you so much for sharing with us and helping us end the conversation on Insight on this episode on a lighter note. Thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you, Nnamdi.
And this is it for this episode of the program. Do join us same time for more on Insight. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I am Joyce Ometu. Do try and keep safe. Observe specified COVID-19 safety protocols. See you next week.